Hey, I'm Father Roderick, and in this video, I want to share with you 7 of what I think were the best moments in Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. And I will also try to explain why I think that these moments are quintessential Star Wars moments that harken back to everything that George Lucas established in the saga as a whole. Now, as you know, I'm a massive fan. I've seen all the movies countless times, and also this new movie, I've watched it multiple times since it came out, and I'm not done with that movie yet. Subscribe to this channel and click the bell to get notifications. Let's dive into it. The first thing that I really loved about this final episode in the Skywalker saga, and something that I really did not expect to happen, is the return of Emperor Palpatine, and also Rey's origin, being the granddaughter of evil Palpatine. Now, for some people this was very disconcerting. They didn't like that at all. It felt a bit contrived, especially because we don't really get to know how he returned and how he survived his demise at the end of Return of the Jedi. And some people even said, well, but doesn't that undo the sacrifice of Darth Vader? Well, I would say it's very fitting that Palpatine returns, and that we also learn that he has been behind all the other evil machinations in the previous 2 movies. Why? Because I think that this saga actually has 2 sides. It's got the Skywalkers, they represent the light side, and you have Palpatine, who is, I think, the symbol of the devil. He is the liar, the person who constantly tempts people away from the light side, tries to let them go the easy route of anger and aggression and everything evil. And so Palpatine is just more than just a character. He stands for, in a certain way, the presence of evil in this world, in our world as well. And the fact that that evil is also personified, this is very important in the Catholic faith, is that evil is not just a result of bad decisions, but evil, it has also a root, and it's not God. God didn't create evil. Evil is the result of wrong choices, and the fact that we are able to choose the dark side, as it were, is because of the gift of freedom. Otherwise, if God would program us, then nothing would ever go wrong. But then, without freedom, you can't love. You can't. Basically, we're robots. And so, the first story that we learn in Genesis, in the first book of the Bible, tells us about a choice for evil that even precedes the choice of Adam and Eve. And that is symbolized in that story by the snake. Well, I would say that in the Star Wars saga, at least in the Skywalker saga, there is this same dynamic in the story. Yes, we see Darth Vader. He's the first one that we meet in A New Hope. And at first we all think, well, that is the ultimate symbol of evil. And then we learn, well, there's actually someone who preceded this and who was the first one to make that evil choice and who tempted Anakin Skywalker to the dark side so that he became Darth Vader. So Anakin, in a certain way, is like Adam in the Bible. At first he was good, and he was, a good boy. And then he got lured into believing that the dark side was the way to go. And so it's very fitting that we have these 2 opposites. You've got the Skywalkers, their failures and successes, but ultimately their choice for the light side. But then you have this ultimate evil, this entity that is Satan, the devil, or in this case, Emperor Palpatine, who just doesn't want to die. And we will be stuck with him until this last defeat, this last battle. And that is the second reason, I think, why they brought back Palpatine. If you, again, compare the storytelling of this Star Wars saga to the storytelling and also the dynamic of the overall story of the Bible, you will see that you have an origin story in Genesis. You've got a middle story, which is the redemption, that's the Son. And then you have the end game, the end fight. And that is in the Bible. It's the book of the Apocalypse. And it depicts a grandiose battle between the old evil, the snake, who now in the end has turned into a dragon. He's only grown in power. And there is this final confrontation with one of the descendants of Adam and Eve, and that is the new Eve. It's the Virgin Mary. And she is the girl who finally crushes the head of the dragon under her feet. So I think that this final confrontation between Rey and Palpatine is a deliberate, let's say, a mirror of biblical storytelling, where we're now in the end phase. This is the apocalypse edition of the Skywalker saga. And so you see this similarity. Also here, you've got the old evil, the old dragon in the world, the old snake. You can never trust him. He will always, when he bites you, he poisons you. That is Palpatine. And then the opposite of that, it's this girl, this young woman, like the Virgin Mary in a certain way, who is powerful beyond anything that we've seen, except for Jesus, because she is completely filled with God's Holy Spirit. And that is how she is able, with his love, to conquer evil. Star Wars is a story that is very much influenced by the religious roots of the great stories that we share in our real world. And so that is why I think that the return of Palpatine is fitting for this apocalyptic confrontation. The second thing that I loved in this episode of the Skywalker saga is, in a way, the redemption of Luke Skywalker. That was one of the things that I struggled with in The Last Jedi, a movie that in general I appreciated and liked, but it wasn't my favorite movie of the 9-story saga, mostly because of the way Luke Skywalker was portrayed. It was such a departure from the Luke Skywalker that I grew up with and that I admired. Such an idealistic, good-natured, open man, and now he is this grumpy, old, bitter, monk-like, reclusive person who doesn't want to help anymore. Who, even in his facial expressions, the way he talks, is all dark and disillusioned. I've always looked at Star Wars to give me hope, and in this case, Luke was not at all an example, was not someone who inspired hope at all, and he almost begrudgingly helps Rey. And promises her 3 lessons, only gives 2. It's like everything that Luke does is just so-so. What I loved about The Rise of Skywalker is that it shows us that was just a temporary phase of Luke's overall life. Now that he has eternal life and he lives in the Force and he appears to Rey, we see that he has finally made peace with what he was supposed to be, and overcame how he behaved on that remote island, and the way that he acted towards Rey. And he explains it. He says, I was afraid. It was fear that kept me imprisoned on that island, that made me close myself to the Force. It was fear. And fear never leads to the right decisions. It never leads to the light side. Fear leads to the dark side. And I loved it that we get to see a much more calm Luke Skywalker here, much more at peace, and giving Rey basically the final lessons that she needs. But that third lesson that was lacking in The Last Jedi, and it was not, that was not on purpose. It was actually something that ended up on the cutting room floor. But you could say that this final encounter between Luke Skywalker and Rey even fixes that plot hole. This is the third lesson. It is this confirmation of something that Rey already knows, and that is never give in to fear. And even someone like Luke Skywalker, who was the last Jedi, fell for the temptation of fear, and but at the same time he was able to overcome it, and that is his redemption. Thirdly, what I absolutely adored in this movie is the central role for C-3PO. I've just finished reading the autobiography of Anthony Daniels, I Am C-3PO, and one of the things that he has told us before, but that he emphasizes and expands upon in his autobiography, is how much he was disappointed that despite his big presence in all the Star Wars movies. Almost always he was kept away from the other actors. In the first movie, he wasn't even on the poster. His name wasn't even mentioned because back then, George Lucas and the people of the marketing around it wanted to try to make people believe that it was an actual android, it was an actual robot. And the fact that he was always in a costume also made him almost a secondary class of actor. I also really was sad that in the prequels his role was so limited, and also almost it was almost Jar Jar like. It was really, really bad, especially in the second prequel. In the last two movies, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, his role was also minimal. And I felt almost as if they were trying to kind of make us forget about 3PO and R2-D2, which I've never understood, because R2 and 3PO are the storytellers of the Skywalker saga. This was something that George Lucas has emphasized many times. Without the perspective of these two droids, the story would be totally different. And so they are this narrative thread throughout the saga. And so it's only fitting that 3PO is back in this movie, and he finally gets the role that he deserves. And in a way, he saves the day. Just like he did in Return of the Jedi, by the way. If he hadn't been elevated as, you know, the god of the Ewoks, well, Han Solo would have been roasted and eaten for dinner. So I love that Anthony Daniels finally got an opportunity to really act. And I think it was brilliant. It was funny. It was very recognizable, as C-3PO still has a lot of humor, but it was very subtle. A lot of the humor is without words, but there is also this touching moment of, let me look one last time at my friends, and that says a lot. Also, what I loved is that the final words of C-3PO in this movie is in a scene together with R2-D2, and I don't know if you noticed this, but C-3PO, he says, "R2, did you hear that?" Exactly the first words we hear him utter when he's on board the Tantive and they're being attacked by Darth Vader. And, well, they hear that the ship is being imprisoned in the Star Destroyer. "R2-D2, did you hear that?" And so it was a beautiful kind of inclusion of his entire role from the first words until the last words, and also bringing back the two of them together. I couldn't be more happy to see that happen. The fourth element or fourth moment that brought me to tears several times that I watched the movie was Leia's role, and more specifically, the sacrifice of Leia. It's her motherly sacrifice that is, I think, her greatest performance, her greatest act, her most important act in the entire story. She sacrifices herself so that her love, her sacrificial love, can break through the walls of hatred that her son has built around him and that kept him imprisoned. And it's only her love. And what is the greatest love? It's giving your life for your friends, in this case for her son, and herself sacrificing her life, and thereby the story of Star Wars and the reality of the death of Carrie Fisher come together in a story beat that I think is absolutely amazing, made me cry, and is an absolute miracle that they were able to pull that off with the limited amount of footage that they could work with. It is maybe the greatest achievement of this movie. Now, of course, I had a wish list. I would have loved to see much more of Leia, and actually, I think from what I've heard, they've done some attempts to bring Leia more into the story, but it was so difficult to make it convincing that they opted to cut these scenes that were not entirely 100% good, to leave them out of the story, and to only give us the best of Carrie Fisher's performance. I respect that. And you don't need to see her to understand what Leia is doing here. This is also a beautiful counterpart to what happens in the prequels, where the death of Anakin's mother brings him to the dark side. So it's this mirror story that I think defines the storytelling of Star Wars and makes it so brilliant. Had Anakin's mother not died, then maybe he would have never made the final leap to the dark side. But it's because of that death, that is a violent death. It's not a sacrifice that she gave out of her free will. She was murdered. And in this case, it's another mother who desperately wants to bring back her son. And in the way that Shmi Skywalker loses her son to the dark side in her death, and she never gets to see his redemption. In the same way, Leia brings back her son to life and to the light side, but she also never witnesses the return, the conversion of her son. It's part of the tragedy of the story of Star Wars, but it doesn't. It's a tragedy for both these mothers, and at the same time, their sacrifice ultimately ends up, with this conversion of Ben Skywalker, and thereby, in a certain way, the redemption of the entire story. That brings me to moment number 5, the redemption of Ben Skywalker and the destruction of Kylo Ren. This is something that I've predicted as long as I've been speculating and talking about this movie. For me, it was clear as daylight that once Ben had killed his father, that there was only one way to bring him back, and that would be by him sacrificing his life. Killing your parent, killing your father, is one of the worst things that someone can do, one of the greatest sins. And such a great sin can only be corrected, can only be healed. It can be forgiven, but there's more is necessary, just like in Catholic confession. There is forgiveness. That's the absolution in the sacrament of forgiveness. But there's also the reparation. There's also the penance that someone needs to do to make right what you have destroyed. And that penance is an integral part of the sacrament of confession. In this story, similar. It's not enough for Ben to convert in his mind, like, oh, I'm so sorry for what I did. He also has to atone for his sin. And the only way that he can make good what he did to his father is by giving his life to save the life of someone that he loved. And by saving the life of Rey, by giving his life. So it's this sacrificial love, again, that makes it possible for him to find redemption. And what I thought was amazing was that once he gets to that moment where he gives his life, all his life force that remains, to raise Rey from the dead, that is the moment that he disappears. And at the same time, in another scene, you see that the body of Leia disappears and fades into the Force, which to me was a very strong symbol of their sacrifice being accepted. So it's one thing to give your sacrifice, but then the fact that both these bodies disappear is the Star Wars way of saying their sacrifice was pleasing to the Force. And so their bodies disappear, just like we saw in A New Hope, where Ben's sacrifice, he sacrificed his life to save Luke Skywalker. His body too disappears because it is a sacrifice that is life-giving. We have one other moment, I think, that we see a body disappear. It's the death of Yoda, who in a way also has given his life until the very last moment to transmit all his knowledge and all his wisdom to Luke Skywalker, who is going to be the last of the Jedi. So he too sacrifices his life until the very last moment. I think that is a beautiful message, a message that we need to hear, because it's ultimately about what true love is. True love is not just a kiss. It's not just, the amor, it's agape, it's sacrificial love. It's love that gives away instead of taking. I loved it and made me cry. Both the death of Leia as well as the ultimate sacrifice of Ben. I thought it was one of the most touching moments in The Rise of Skywalker. That is followed, number 6, by this beautiful moment at the end of the story on Tatooine. It also makes sense to go back where everything started. It's almost a pilgrimage of Rey. She makes 2 pilgrimages in this movie. First, she goes back to the island of Achtu, and she destroys her ship. She wants to destroy her lightsaber. Basically, it's a negative way of, it's a negative pilgrimage. She wants to, basically walk away from everything, just like Luke did on that island. She wants to shut herself off from everything because she's so disappointed, so disillusioned. But she finds new hope, a new hope. And so her second pilgrimage at the end of the movie goes back to the place where everything was born, this remote planet in the Outer Rim, a bit like Bethlehem, Nazareth. It's just really not a bustling, important planet like Coruscant or whatever. By the way, did you see that there are rumors that the original draft for the story of The Rise of Skywalker, or this last movie of that was written by Colin Trevorrow, was leaked, apparently. I read through it, and a lot of it takes place on Coruscant. I'm thinking, I don't want to go to Coruscant. Maybe it's fake, I don't know, but I'm so glad that this movie ends on Tatooine. And it ends, very fittingly, with life and death, a symbolic moment of life and death. It's you've got the 2 lightsabers, and they're wrapped in cloth, like babies, like children. And these 2 lightsabers represent Luke and Leia, these 2 children, these twins. And so there was this beautiful, tender way of wrapping them into these cloths that at least to me, gave me the impression this symbolizes these 2 babies that were born and were separated from each other. But now they're finally together. And then after this symbol of birth, there is this symbol of death, because she uses the Force to dig a hole in the sand. I'm not sure why she needs the Force to do that, but hey, well, if you can't do it, why not? And then you see these 2 lightsabers disappear in this grave, and the sand flows back. And so you have this end, this funeral in a place of peace, a place of rest. There is nobody is there. No one has been around for many, many years. We hear from this woman that passes by. And so this is a really peaceful place for the story of Luke and Leia to end. And that's why we see them also at the end. Some people told me, hey, I wish we would have seen all the Jedi, all those Force ghosts. I'm so glad they didn't do that. I mean, that would have been bad taste, I think, to see this huge crowd, let's make a group selfie, all smile, 3, 2, 1, smile. No, this was much, much better. And because you finally see Luke and Leia united. And so everything that evil did to their lives and separating them, that's something very violent, to be separated as babies from the same mother and the same father. But in the end, they're back together, symbolized by these 2 lightsabers, but also in death, they are together forever. I thought it was beautiful. And of course, there's also this hope, you could say, that she buries these lightsabers, but will they stay there forever? Or will there be one day a movie or a story where in the future someone will come along and will dig up these 2 lightsabers to start a new story? I think this end scene is perfect. And if there is ever going to be a follow-up story to this saga, I hope that it will begin on Tatooine and it will start with these 2 lightsabers. Number 7, the final moment that I loved in this in this movie is also the final moment of the movie itself and of the entire saga. It is Rey who is asked for the umptieth time, "Who are you?" That has been the central question of these last three films. Who are you? And every time she has to give an answer that doesn't feel good. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. I'm from this garbage planet. You know, who wants to live my life? I'm nobody. And then that is confirmed by Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi. You are a nobody. Your parents were nobodies. And in this, and then at the beginning of this movie, she discovers, well, who am I? I am a Palpatine. I'm evil, and she has to face that, and she has to confront that. In The Last Jedi, you had that scene in, you know, that is this moment kind of outside of reality where she has to face herself, and you have these mirrors, and the only thing she sees is herself, and she sees her the way she is. But she doesn't really see beyond the mirror. Mirror doesn't allow you to look through it. And in this movie, I love this. On the Death Star, of all places, the remains of the Death Star, she goes into this version of the cave, and she confronts her true identity. And that is, I'm the offspring of the ultimate evil. I am a Palpatine. And so instead of seeing herself in the reflection, she sees what her reflection could have been. So you see evil Rey, the most shocking moment in any trailer that I've ever seen. And she has to confront that to realize, and that makes it so Star Wars, she has to decide that what she sees there, her own reflection, the evil reflection of herself, is not necessarily her destiny. No matter what Palpatine tells her time and again, it is your destiny. No, it's not. Because she has free will and she can choose the light side. And that's what she does. And that is why her adopting the name of Skywalker is the ultimate symbol of an act of free will. I am not determined by what my parents and grandparents did. I am not defined. Who I am is not defined by the wrong choices of those that came before me. I am me. And I can choose from now on, just like even Ben could make a choice until the very last moment to return to the light side. That is why redemption in Star Wars is always possible. And Rey here mirrors what Ben does by giving his life and by becoming Ben again, Ben Solo. In a way, also a Skywalker, you could say. At least that's how Palpatine sees it. You're the last Skywalker, and then he throws Ben into the abyss. Here, Rey mirrors that by also deciding, I am not defined by the fact that I am the offspring of Palpatine. I choose to be a Skywalker. I am a Skywalker because everything the Skywalker stand for, and that is stronger than blood, that is what I carry in myself. That is what I choose to carry in me to the future. And this is why I love that scene where she hears all the voices of the Jedi that came before her. It is her adopting her legacy and choosing not to hear all the Sith voices in her head and to, become the vessel of evil, but to choose to adopt and to embrace the goodness of all the people that came before her. And that is what defines her future. I mean, that's so strong. That is genius. That is so... I can't think of a better way to end the saga like this. And the more I see this movie, the more I get what JJ and the other writers are trying to do. I love this movie. Hey, I totally understand if you don't share all of my points of views. After all, it's only my point of view, as Ben Kenobi would say. But what I'd love to hear, what were for you the highlights of this movie? What was what you didn't like in this movie? Let me know in the comments. Let's continue our conversation there. If you want to follow me on this channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button. I also have 2 other YouTube channels, two new YouTube channels that you may want to follow. One is dedicated to my vlogs and to my documentaries, and it's called Father Roderick Stories. If you type that in YouTube, it will bring you to that YouTube channel. So that's documentaries and vlogs. And if you like Lego and you like to chat while watching a Catholic priest building Lego castles and stuff, then you may also want to check out my Lego channel that is called Father Roderick Builds. So Father Roderick Builds and Father Roderick Stories, both on YouTube. If you want to support my work, then you may want to consider becoming a patron. My patrons help me, for instance, to buy a camera, to sometimes invest in new equipment, lights. I've got some nice lights here. I've got a nice green screen background that I'm trying out. It's all thanks to these patrons. If you want to join them, go to patreon.com/Father Roderick, and there are perks for my patrons, things that I do as a thank you in return, one of which is a weekly podcast that is only available to the patrons, where I share a lot of the very personal things in my life. So check it out at patreon.com/Father Roderick. Thanks for watching. May the Force be with you.